We're really pumped because our next guest is not just a personal friend of mine, but I think she's the hardest working woman in NFL media. Listen to her jobs. She's the senior NFL insider for USA Today, NFL insider for CBS Sports headquarters. She's host of The Crew and Undefined with Josina Anderson. Whew. She's also my former colleague and a terrific person. Josina Anderson, welcome to the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show. It is great to see you again.
What's up? Can you guys hear me okay? My camera is a little different because I couldn't get it to connect to my camera in my studio, but I'm on the laptop camera right now.
You look great. We can hear you. Everything. It's great to see you. How you been? Everything good?
Well, let me turn off my phone because Twitter notifications are going crazy. But, as you know, this is typically the rest period before training camp starts. And, none of the media obviously covering the Browns, who are covering the Washington Commanders, the Texans, I think the Ravens and the Cardinals. I don't think anybody doing any of those stories are getting any rest right now.
Yeah, there's no rest for you guys, especially right now. So empty your reporter notebook on what we should know about this hearing that's going on with the NFL today and the Deshaun Watson incident. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so we know that Sue Robinson is having the opportunity to talk to Deshaun Watson herself in person. Sue Robinson is the jointly appointed hearing officer from both the NFL and the NFLPA. And really, she's the kind of first stopgap in this new process that is under the the CBA that was obviously redone in 2020. With this case, it's kind of giving us an opportunity to see how something like this would flow through how they're doing things now. And the reason why I say she's kind of that first stopgap is because when she makes her findings, she determines that there is a violation. Then Roger Goodell, after that, has the opportunity to weigh in, whether he keeps it the way it is, goes up or down. But if she determines that there is no violation, then that's kind of the final ruling right there. One of the things that I just tweeted before coming on your show is that at least the expectation going into this hearing with Deshaun Watson is that the NFL was expected to focus on 5 women of the 24 that obviously involve the civil litigations that at least before settling 20 of them that Deshaun Watson was facing. And of those 2, at least if nothing has changed with their strategy, that 2 of those 5 were women who had their cases dismissed by 2 separate grand juries, per league sources in the conversations that I've had. And we're also expecting, at least from Deshaun Watson's side, for there to be a presentation eventually at some point for them to present what they feel are their purported mistruths and the allegations that Deshaun Watson has been facing. And then the last point that I just pointed out on Twitter was that obviously per the report from the Wall Street Journal that the NFL was expected to pursue an indefinite suspension for a minimum of a year, and that tactically, obviously on the other end, that Deshaun Watson is expected to, at least his side is expected to argue for 0 games at the opposite spectrum of that, kind of per how you would expect a negotiation to go. And the last point is that there's still, even though I did report that talks did fall apart heading into this hearing, there's always, at least mechanically, still the opportunity for a settlement before Sue Robinson comes to her findings.
Josina, do you think that we will, so let's say when Sue Robinson comes to whatever penalty she thinks there should be, do you think that will get out there initially, or will the league put that out there, or is we going to have to wait for somebody like you to break the news on that, or will the league just try to, if the league doesn't like what her penalty is that she's suggesting, will they ignore it, not put it out, and then just say, hey?
So I expect, since this hearing officer is jointly appointed, right, she's there to provide a buffer before Roger Goodell. Okay. So it would make sense to then make that known, whether it comes out from the league saying it, and obviously we're in this process, but I would expect that. And even if it doesn't, we'll find out anyways. But yes, I expect for us to know, because she's there to provide a buffer for then the league to bounce off of that and be like, well, this is what she said, now this is what we say. You see what I'm saying? So that why not use that?
So one of the 2 sides will leak it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if not officially presented by the NFL. I mean, if you remember, in the Ezekiel Elliott case, we were able to read kind of how that went. I believe in the Myles Garrett. I believe in Tom Brady. So there have been instances where we have heard what has happened behind the scenes via, a written decision. I would expect that to be the case here. I can't say that I know that for sure. I'm just, thinking common sense. It would make sense for at least the league to have that be known.
Do you think we'll know that before the end of this week? I mean, is that going to happen that quickly, or is it still going to be more time, you think?
So I have, league sources that are saying, and of course, just because this is what they're saying doesn't mean it will ultimately flow that way. But at least the expectation is for us to, have some sort of understanding before the July 4th holiday. Will it go that way? That's what they're striving for at this point. And then because it makes sense, and also what I've heard is, the goal is to have, the Browns and the teams associated with figuring all this out, because obviously there are multiple people connected to this, including Baker Mayfield, to have an understanding of, where all this sits prior to training camp. That's the goal. Will it end up that way? We'll see.
Do you get a sense, Josina, of just how strong the Watson camp believes his case is? I know you said that at some point during this hearing he'll have the opportunity to present what they believe will be mistruths to try to shoot down some of these allegations. How much confidence do they have in their set of truth, in their set of facts?
I've never heard any equivocations, at least per how they feel about their side, what we've heard direct from Deshaun Watson's mouth in his introductory press conference, and then also when he spoke during the first day of mandatory camp, and I was there for that in person. I think Deshaun Watson has continued to try to show, at least especially the second time that he spoke, his understanding for the sensitivity of what's being discussed, especially when he was asked that question about whether he has any regrets about saying he didn't have any regrets. And I believe that answer was, I understand why people were triggered by that answer, but he still asserted that he did no wrongdoing. And to that end, per what you're hearing from his own mouth, at least when I've talked to sources relative to how they feel about that in that vein, and some of the things that I think will come to be revealed with respect to the evidence that they present, I have not heard any equivocation.
Josina, we've heard over and over and over the league is pushing for a minimum of a year suspension. If that's the case, then it's going to be a year, because Roger can just change whatever decision Sue makes. What am I missing here?
Well, the thing first of all, we have to hear from Sue first, and she could fall anywhere on that spectrum. Okay, so let's just say, and I'm not saying this is what she'll do, but just to give you an example, and I tweeted this, what if Sue Robinson shows deference to the fact that Deshaun Watson still has pending litigation, and she feels that any findings from her would be prejudicial to what's still ongoing? What number would that be?
Yeah.
What if, Sue Robinson feels like on the other end of that, and I don't know, that 24 allegations is 24 allegations, and, she goes that way because she's deferential to a number, so that's why I'm just saying, especially to try to stay in the middle here, is that we really first and foremost need to hear what Sue Robinson thinks. Nobody knows what Sue Robinson thinks, but assuming that there's not a settlement before she comes up with a decision, where she stakes that flagpole along that spectrum will, I think, then give us an idea of where or where not the league or Roger Goodell can maneuver, at least trying to show some deference to a degree of what Sue says.
This obviously is not a
Does
court
that make
of,
sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not a court of law. So these 20 cases that have been dismissed, do we have any idea how much impact those are going to have? I know they're focusing on these 4 or 5 cases, but there are still 20 cases out there, and all the allegations are known, and they're all public. So even though those cases are settled, the horses are still out of that barn. How much of an impact are those 20 settled cases going to have on any sort of verdict? Do we have any idea?
So a couple of things. One, the NFL spokesman, I believe, Brian McCarthy tweeted, I believe that was on the 21st of June, that the settled cases are to bear no impact on the process. So that was from the league. And that's kind of when I heard that statement, that's what kind of led me to make some more calls, because I just felt that was interesting timing, saying that relative to just what you said, the power that they hold at least at the end of this process. So I thought that was interesting. But I think an even more interesting question for me is, even though he was facing 24 civil lawsuits, why is the league, at least per the expectation of what we're hearing, why are they just focusing on 5?
Yeah, I found that interesting too. Like, have they already dismissed? Because I think you said that we know that at least 2 of those 5 were pursuing criminal charges in the indictment, of which on two cases there were no charges handed down.
2 separate grand juries, right, determined to, that there was it wasn't to be followed up with an indictment. It was a no bill or what have you, unless, somewhere in this process, they're changing their, the strategy or what have you. But that's what I was hearing per the expectation going into the hearing. But I do think that is a question is, we all have been talking about all of these, ladies that have the right to say what they feel. And certainly their oral testimony is worthy of being heard. But I do think it's an interesting objective question to ask, given that totality, why is the league focusing on just the amount that we're expected for them to be, following, so to speak.
It is an interesting distinction for sure. One of the things that we know could happen here, it's very unlikely. In fact, no one on this panel thinks it's possible at all that Sue Robinson says there's absolutely no punishment in order here. We expect that she'll say somewhere, where will she, in your words, put the flagpole? We think there will be a number of games. At that point, that allows the appeal, and we know that Roger Goodell then could hear the appeal himself and rule, or he could appoint someone else. I can't imagine, Josina, just on the optics alone.
Now you know why this got to get done before July 4th, at least the Sue Robinson, at least you would think, to stay on time.
No,
you know what I'm
it
saying?
makes sense. It makes sense, but I can't imagine a scenario where Roger Goodell says that he will hear the appeal and make the ultimate decision. The optics of that, particularly what's going on with the NFLPA saying we are going to bring up the previous allegations against owners and how they were judged. I can't imagine that Roger Goodell would make the ruling himself. He certainly will appoint someone else to hear that appeal, won't he?
I mean, I'm not sure. I think that's why I just keep going back to, it really just depends on what Sue says and where that number stands. Like, let's say hypothetically she were to say 4 games, that lever is more on that flagpole is more on the other side, then that gives some room for Roger to still optically look like he's coming down hard. So that you see what I'm saying? I just think that we just need to wait until we hear from Sue, that, presumably, assuming there's no settlement before that, and that will give us some indication of where we think that it will go. Roger was just before Congress, speaking about the situation with Daniel Snyder and the Washington Commanders, who, by the way, they're trying to figure out how to get to France and serve him that subpoena. That's a whole other thing. Deshaun Watson, at least per reports, is, attending this hearing. But I think we just, given the fact that has occurred, with Roger Goodell, and we know that the league overall is sensitive to optics and sensitive to the entire picture, that could also stand to reason why he may want to do it himself. So I just think we have to wait. You know what I mean?
Josina, just imagine they drop the hammer. We lose Watson for the whole year. How deep do you think the Baker Mayfield-led Browns can go into the playoffs this year?
Oh my God.
Hey, listen, I have been talking about this. I saw the comments that Baker Mayfield said that he today, at least. I haven't seen all of them, so I haven't seen everything because I'm running to get ready for your show and other things that I've got after this. But I did see, at least in a tweet, where he said he thinks both sides are ready to move on, but potentially, it would be, the Browns would need to reach out more, something like that. I know I'm not, quoting that right. I don't have it right in front of me.
That's accurately paraphrased.
But that's mostly the sentiment, right? So
yeah.
Here's the thing. Baker Mayfield, part of the reason why I feel like he knows he needs to say that, Baker Mayfield's under contract. He doesn't get to dictate where he goes.
Right.
Yeah.
You're under contract. You have, unless you don't want that 18 point. I mean, he could give it to me. I'll take the 18 million. But he 18.858 million. You see, the Browns are paying that anyway. So I think, as I said on Colin Cowherd's show yesterday, I think it behooves the Browns to figure out what's going on with Deshaun, and then we'll go from there. They still have to get something that they feel is proportionate or commensurate with your value in order to give you away, because we know they're not going to give you away because they're going to pay you anyways. We've been talking about that. That doesn't make any sense. So everything has to make sense. And what if that includes, them telling you need to come back?
Boom.
You know what I'm saying? And then we are going to find out where Baker Mayfield stands. I'm sorry, my boss at CBS always tell me I'm talking with my hands too much. With my hands.
No, I love it. We love it. It shows passion.
Be yourself, Joe. Be yourself.
But what I'm saying is that we are going to find out where Baker Mayfield stands relative to how he wants to handle this for somebody who is under contract, because eventually the deadline for training camp will come up. And so we will see. And I just think that, listen, there are many of us who in our careers feel disrespected, awkward to come to work. Not just this, not just that. You know what I'm saying? This is not fair or whatever. And you know what we all have to do?
Go to work.
Shut up and go to work.
We got to come to work. So I'm so tired. Listen, I'm down the middle. But with regards to this issue, I'm just tired of people saying, "Oh, it's awkward." Who cares?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying, you know what I'm saying, in the sense that there's in America, in this world, many of us have to deal with that. So we'll see how Andrew Berry decides to handle this relative to what is on the table at the time of training camp, and if he feels that is enough to pull the lever for somebody who was a first-round number 1 overall pick.
Josina, I know you've mentioned on Twitter a couple times, you've mentioned Seattle. We've talked about Seattle here if he does get traded. Carolina's certainly been mentioned. We were talking yesterday about, hey, both these teams want to get rid of these quarterbacks. Would it make sense to swap Baker for Jimmy Garoppolo? Would that make, what's the latest on Seattle, and would that make any sense, a Baker for Garoppolo switch?
I don't think that it makes sense for Baker if you're getting rid of Garoppolo because you intend to focus on Trey, right? And that's why you're getting rid of Jimmy. Jimmy has led the 49ers to two Super Bowls? Am I correct on that?
One Super Bowl,
one Super Bowl, and thank you. Okay, so very close. All right, and at least when you're talking about the arms race that happened this offseason with the way that the Rams stocked up the Raiders, I mean, all of these teams, and I've had these conversations with 49er sources or whatever, went down at the owners meeting in West Palm Beach. My personal opinion is I think that Jimmy still gives you the best opportunity relative to the competition when we get to the postseason to be competitive. So if you were doing that, you're saying that you're focusing on Trey. And I don't know if that's the best scenario for Baker. I don't know that necessarily makes sense relative to everything that they gave up to give to Trey, and then what Cleveland would need in exchange to make that make sense. I'd have to kind of go through and look at what their draft compensation is. But I know that they gave up a lot to give Trey. You know what I mean?
What about Seattle?
As I reported, high level of interest. They would like him, but people keep talking about this is about the money and whatever, because it's depending on how much a team will take on or whatever. And technically that's true, but it's really not the case. This is about principle, pride, and philosophy. The Browns, per my understanding, have the most cap room in the league at like 42 or whatever. It's 40 plus million when you factor in the Austin Hooper contract. The Panthers have 25. The Seahawks can do this. Even if you pay him for half for Baker, half of 18 is 9. When you look at the fact that right now there's 7 quarterbacks earning over 40 million a year to be a starter, 9 million is nothing. Yeah. Even if you're paying 75% of 18, that is nothing. We're not fighting over money. We're fighting on what we think we should do, because we know that eventually you would like to get rid of Baker. It's not about the price. It's about what I think or I feel I should pay.
So week 1, September, What's your best guess? Where's Baker? Cleveland, Seattle, Carolina, San Francisco, or somewhere else?
Well, one thing I think we haven't mentioned a lot is, is the interesting kind of connection here between Scott Fitter, who works with the Panthers, and John Schneider. Right now, they used to work together. Now they're on the opposite ends of this. So it'll be interesting if behind the scenes, if one kind of starts cranking up on the other. Right? I was hearing that the Seahawks are open to a contract extension with the Seahawks. I know per the history of the Panthers and what they were able to get done with Teddy Bridgewater and bringing down his number before he went down to the Broncos, it makes sense that they would try that with Baker. Right? And whether that's flying or not. So behind the scenes now, let's watch the mechanics of how both of them, maybe try to go up on each other, so to speak, to either get this done or not done per pride and philosophy and principle based on the conversations with Andrew. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
and this is why you kind of have to watch those lines and the history and the relationships behind the scenes, because sometimes they can kind of tell you things too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So is that your bet where it'll be on opening day?
I think. I mean, as of right now, I feel like a report that also came out before, although I don't have it right in front of me. I believe that there was a report that had said that, I know Aaron Wilson recently said that there's mutual interest with Baker Mayfield and the Seahawks. And I believe that there's a report a few weeks ago talking about after the Colts had gotten Matt Ryan, that now Baker preferred to go to the Seahawks, whatever. I think that that's, the case in terms of the assets that are there with Tyler Lockett. It makes sense. So if you're asking me, if it were, that's what I would predict now, but certainly things can change. You know what I mean? Because it's not up to Baker.
But the one thing that I take away from it is, and you're plugged in, you're talking to a lot of different teams. You don't think that the ship has completely left the port, that there is a Baker and Browns reunion. Am I reading that right?
Because I think that even if there's a 1% chance, there's still a chance. And I just think that when you apply common sense, yes, the Browns do believe in Jacoby Brissett. They believe he's one of the best, not that he can't be a starter, but relative to the role that he's in now, that he's one of the best number 2 quarterbacks in the league. But the problem is, behind Jacoby Brissett, you have Josh Dobbs, who's never started a game. And even though we've got confidence and you're going to say all the coach speak, the reality is he's never started a game. Mm-hmm. So if Jacoby Brissett gets hurt, you know what I'm saying? You have to cover yourself. I try to report and think on things that make sense.
I've tried that too, but boy, they kill me for it.
But if Deshaun ends up, it goes in a way that, has him out for an extended period of time, it would make sense for you to tell Baker Mayfield to pick up his pill and come to work until we figure this out. And oh, by the way, these comments that Baker Mayfield keeps making about, I think it's time that we both move on. Baker, if you would like to leave Cleveland, which we know that you would, those comments are not helping the compensation that Andrew Berry needs to get in order to ship you off, because it's not in your power. So that's not helping.
Great point.
I think it's very, very interesting, though, that he said, I would talk if they reached out to me. They haven't reached out to me.
And oh, by the way,
that just says there's a chance that they could fix this thing.
Well, Jay, and I won't go into the specifics, and I know people getting on me about Twitter, you tweet these things and you don't follow up on it. Well, first of all, I don't do that to tease. I really don't do that to tease. Sometimes I say that because I'm literally just like you all. I'm reacting to things, right? And sometimes, not everything is at the point where I can say certain things on Twitter. It just is what it is. That's part of being an insider, right? Nope. But my point is, but relative to what I did say, and I know your show ends at 1:00, is that
that never stops us.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Is that that's just not my understanding. I think the way that is making it sound as if there's been no reach out on the Browns' behalf relative to how I just know how things were going down before mandatory camp. I don't know. He might say that that's not what he was intimating, but if that was what he was intimating, then that's not in accordance with my understanding.
By the way, this is exactly what I'll read the tweet here. This guy Casey Murdoch from Oklahoma says, "I asked Baker if there was any chance for a reconciliation with the Browns if they were without their quarterback this season. He said the Browns would have to reach out to start that process. Mayfield said he has moved on." So that's the exact.
Yeah. So I feel like if that is
yes, there's a
Yeah.
chance, but I've moved on.
Yeah, right.
But he's also saying there's a chance.
Well,
Bull
I
Bull
think
doesn't want to focus on that part.
so. Just to kind of get to the last part of that statement again, the last part of that what that intimates is different from my understanding based on how things were going down before mandatory camp.
Interesting.
And then to what Jay was saying, as far as that sounding diametrically opposing, I think you feel that because Baker knows that it's not in his power.
Right.
So you're saying, just to clarify, Josina, you're saying that based on your sources, the Browns would have been willing to have him at mini camps, or they were talking to him and he was not reciprocating, or am I getting that right?
I don't want to get into details. I would just say the way that, because again, I'd have to kind of go back and circle around, and then if got the green light, whatever. But I would just say that per my understanding, the way he's intimating that is contrary to my understanding. You can take from whatever.
Okay,
you want
I'll take that.
Yep.
Delicately
right now.
put.
Yeah.
By the way, Josina, before you go, you have not only broken into a field, you've destroyed a field in a positive way. Like you busted down the door of a field that has been a male-dominated field, right? You're an NFL insider, and from my perspective, which I don't know you personally, and I don't know the truth, but it seems to me, I've been saying this for a while, that you seem to be the most connected insider of everybody, especially on the players' side. I feel like the players really trust you. They're very comfortable. Now, I don't know that for a fact because you have these relationships. I don't. Is that accurate? And how did you make that happen? Because that's not an easy thing to do, obviously.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the kind words. I won't assert whether that's true or not. I'll just take that to be, what you think, and I appreciate that. But as far as how, that came to be, I would just say quickly that, originally started off as a basketball insider, contrary to what people know. And then, when I went to Fox in Denver, I broke this story about Ricky Williams being gone for the whole year when he was a running back for the Dolphins. Sure. And that got me on Cold Pizza, which that's when I first met Jay.
Right. And she killed it.
Because of that story. And, ever since it kind of just ballooned from there. I was like, oh, you like that. And so I just kind of, went with that. And I think after that, one of my next big stories was Larry Johnson being out for the year for the Chiefs, the running back, and Herm Edwards was the head coach at the time. And then they tried to shoot down my story, like, who's this girl from Denver? Who does she think she is? And then they waited, I remember this stuff, to December 24th before they put out the release attesting to the fact that it was true. And then it went on from there, and I was broke this story, broke that story, whatever. And then Peter King and then Jason Whitlock at the time, they write these articles about this girl, and then, now I do Showtime, the ESPN, and then the rest is history. So that's kind of how it was. But I would just say lastly to that end was just that, and I'll say this to reporters who are young reporters who are listening or what have you, one of the things that I think is crucial in that is that when I was covering the local team in Denver, typically, what you do is you follow the team that you're locally there and geographically bound to cover, what have you. But I really made it a point, and still to this day, especially if I'm in a city, is I was making a point to always go to the opposing locker room. That's how, and just to continue to build my sources when the other people would come in from other towns, because I already got the Broncos. I'm trying to find out everybody else. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Well,
thank you, Josina. That was awesome.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I had a front row seat for all of that. I remember vividly when we brought Josina on, everybody was asking, who is this? And I said, if you read her on a regular basis, you'll know she's dialed in and she's got incredible sources and contacts. And I've been so proud to watch from a distance you develop into the insider that you are. You do a marvelous job, and
she's a megastar now.
She is, yeah. She's just huge.
All
and
right, you guys.
She does it by being fair to the players.
Yeah.
And they've earned her trust. I've talked to
no
players.
doubt.
She's going to get a big head, you guys.
Well, no,
keep doing
one thing
this.
I can tell you about Josina.
No, but I want to say that Jay is equally as great. You know what I'm saying? Just as far
Let's
as
not get
always
carried
being
away,
very
Joe.
cordial
Agree to
and kind.
disagree.
I mean, I wanted this to be a mutual flower throwing session, and I'm sure you all know there that Jay is just a genuinely a great person. And trust me, y'all know I say how I feel. I don't feel like about everybody.
No,
You just say
know
nothing
you
else.
don't.
If you hated him, you just wouldn't say anything.
That's right.
No.
JoJo, great to see you
Well,
again,
I will
and
be on
we'll
the
have you
show.
back.
Yes, we appreciate
We'll have
it.
you back. So
Yes, I appreciate it.
Be
I'm
ready
on
for
a
my
show at 1
calls.
o'clock that I'm late for. All right, so we'll talk
You were
soon.
wonderful.
Yep.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Josina.
Josina
She's
Anderson
great.
does a terrific job. She really does.